In the Family Guy episode, Switch the Flip, Stewie builds a machine that lets him and Brian switch bodies. To help Brian fix his life, things go completely off track when the machine breaks, causing everyone's minds in Quahog to swap bodies randomly. Chaos spreads, with people ending up in some hilariously mismatched situations. While Brian struggles with Stewie's genius brain, Stewie faces the horror of Brian's messy lifestyle. The two argue their way through this bizarre mess, trying to figure out how to fix everything. Imagine Peter in someone else's body acting like his usual clueless self, and you'll get the picture. The episode ends with Brian and Stewie learning a little about walking in each other's shoes. Literally, leave it to these two to turn a simple experiment into total madness.
Stewie, you know what? It's hard being a dog.
Stewie's habit of turning simple situations into disasters strikes again in this scene. Brian's complaints start innocently enough, but his self-pity soon spirals into actions that put them both in hot water. Their usual dynamic comes into play, with Stewie's cleverness clashing with Brian's tendency to turn small issues into big problems. As always, whenever these two are involved, chaos isn't far behind.
One day in your body, I would give it back to you with a new and improved life.
Stewie, in his usual relaxed way, makes a bold promise saying he could make Brian's life better if he spent a day in his body. Things quickly get out of hand when Stewie, now in Brian's position, starts interfering with everything. Instead of making things better, Stewie's fixes lead to one problem after another. Stewie ends up proving he's much better at creating chaos than solving problems.
We did it! We switched bodies!
Stewie, with his overconfidence and carefree attitude, excitedly declares, "We did it! We switched bodies!" As if that alone were a triumph. The irony? Stewie, who constantly claims he could do better in Brian's shoes, proves that his talent lies more in creating disasters than handling responsibility.
Hey, how'd it go fixing my life?
As usual, Brian's life is left in ruins whenever Stewie tries to fix anything, showing that letting Stewie take charge is never a good idea. Brian and Stewie arrive in Berlin, and at first everything seems fine. However, their mood shifts when they see unsettling and offensive drawings of Jewish people, stark reminders of a dark period in history. This uneasy discovery sets the tone for their mission. Stewie pinpoints the location of the uranium lab thereafter, turning their lighthearted banter into a serious task. With history, comedy, and action all swirling together, the duo gear up to face the chaos ahead, blending their signature humor with the high-stakes tension of their unusual mission.
So this is Berlin, huh? Doesn't seem so bad.
Brian and Stewie find themselves in Berlin, navigating a tense mission, but in classic Stewie style, his laid-back attitude creates chaos.
Hey, psst, fellas, you want to get a free caricature?
Instead of sneaking past like Brian wanted, Stewie's clueless friendliness makes them stand out. Quickly, they're surrounded by the very people they were avoiding.
Arrestungsfree! These filths are making a mockery of our Reich! Execute them!
Stewie's clueless actions attract the attention of the guards, who immediately give orders to arrest them, followed by the command to execute them. Brian, upset, lashes out with sarcastic remarks about Stewie's constant failure to stay quiet. This is just another typical Stewie mess-up, turning what should have been an easy escape into a life-threatening disaster. Stewie, ever the enthusiast for random adventures, convinces Brian to pierce his ear, and of course, Brian agrees without a second thought. After a series of goofy exchanges, Stewie manages to pull together a needle, or rather a pin from a sweater, believing that's all it takes to make it work. As he preps for the piercing, his mind goes off on tangents about knuckleless gloves. To top it all off, Brian decides to sterilize the pin using Scotch whiskey, which, needless to say, doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Classic Stewie cluelessly dragging Brian into yet another mess, all while believing he's being the helpful sidekick.
I want you to pierce my ear.
Let's do it.
What started as a simple ear piercing quickly turns into a disaster. As usual, Brian's boldness leads to chaos.
I don't know where the pin went. It's stuck in there.
In typical Brian fashion, his botched attempt to pierce Stewie's ear spirals into chaos. The absurdity of using a pin from a sweater for an ear piercing highlights Stewie's lack of foresight and adds to the comedic mayhem of the situation. Stewie, is left in a bloody mess. Just another day in the life of being stuck with Stewie's disastrous ideas.
How's it look? Cool.
Brian's attempt at preventing 9/11 turns into an epic disaster as his overconfidence leads to chaos and a civil war. Sure, Brian claims that the world will thank him in the future for saving lives, but fast forward 5 years, and it's clear he's made things way worse. Instead of a world grateful for his heroism, the future is a mess of political turmoil, nuclear destruction, and the bizarre fallout of his well-meaning blunder. What was meant to be a good deed ends up with a civil war, millions dead, and a confused Brian left trying to fix the mess. Typical Brian, big ideas, terrible execution, and an endless supply of comic disaster.
In fact, I bet 5 years from now, the world will still be better off for what I did. Then let's go 5 years into the future.
Brian, in his usual style, confidently declares the world will still be better off for what he did. Stewie, as always, rolls his eyes, unimpressed. This bold declaration comes right after Brian's completely misguided attempt to help Stewie by getting involved in yet another mess.
The world seems okay, which proves my point. Me stopping 9/11 led to a world that's just fine.
Brian, in his typical fashion, asserts the world seems okay, which is all that matters, as though his actions are justified, as Brian somehow convinces himself that his decisions are somehow making the world a better place. It's a classic case of Brian's misplaced optimism and Stewie's ever-present frustration, resulting in yet another comedic disaster that only Brian could have caused.
I get it, Stewie, I screwed up. All right, I shouldn't have altered the past.
Brian, in his typical half-hearted attempt at an apology, finally admits, I screwed up, all right? It's a moment of rare self-awareness, but also one that's quickly overshadowed by the chaos Brian has caused. This time, it's a ridiculous and poorly executed ear-piercing plan that's gone horribly wrong. It's just another day in the world of Brian and Stewie, where the former's good intentions are never quite enough to prevent mayhem. In this scene, Stewie's reckless invention, a return pad meant to manipulate space and time, ends up causing more trouble than it's worth, with Brian getting caught in the mess. When they find themselves outside the space-time continuum, Stewie tries to fix things by overloading the pad, resulting in an explosion that creates the universe. Stewie claims this explosion was the Big Bang, and he in essence created everything, though Brian, not being as brilliant, is reduced to the Art Garfunkel of the situation, only tagging along for the ride. With the stakes hilariously high, Brian's disastrous curiosity and Stewie's genius lead to an absurd paradox, where the very concept of creation becomes a time loop of hilarity and chaos. The mix of cosmic science and absurd humor highlights how even the smartest plans can end up in a catastrophic, universe-altering mess.
Let me see that panel.
No, don't touch that!
Let me see that. Move out of the way.
In this scene, Brian is messing with Stewie's invention, a complex return pad that Stewie has carefully engineered. When Brian can't resist poking around, it causes chaos. As a result, they get trapped outside the space-time continuum. Stewie's machine, meant to be a genius creation, now becomes the catalyst for a universe-shattering mistake. In typical Family Guy fashion, Stewie's frustration is only topped by Brian's cluelessness, as they both end up in a place with no laws of physics, giving Stewie the chance to show off his sarcastic genius with a hilarious explanation of how he created the universe. It's a perfect blend of wit, comic absurdity, and sci-fi chaos, all thanks to Brian's inability to leave well enough alone.
What happened? Where are we?
I don't know.
In this scene, Brian's attempt to make a quick buck and impress Stewie backfires when he sells one of Peter's old vinyl records, Queen's News of the World, to pay for an eating contest. Stewie, who's already nervous about the album's creepy cover, featuring a robot monster, is terrified that the album is a sentient killer robot. Brian tries to calm him down, but Stewie is convinced he's going to be eaten. Things get even worse when the robot doesn't kill him, but Brian's continued misunderstanding and Stewie's overreaction create an absurdly chaotic mess. Eventually, Brian reassures Stewie that it's just an album, but not without a bunch of dramatic, over-the-top moments.
You're really scared of this thing, huh?
Does it eat little boys?
I don't know, maybe, if it's hungry.
Stewie, already terrified and over-imagining the worst possible scenario, starts to freak out, believing the robot is a real sentient creature that could attack him. Brian's careless, half-joking comment only escalates the tension, and instead of reassuring Stewie, it creates a comedic mess where Stewie spirals into further panic while Brian tries and fails to de-escalate the absurd situation. Classic Brian, always making things worse when he's trying to make light of the problem.
Good morning. Thought I'd help you wake up.
God, why does he look sad? He's already destroyed mankind. What else could he want?
In this scene, Brian tries to help Stewie wake up in his usual chaotic way, but instead of offering any meaningful assistance, he sarcastically acts like he's doing Stewie a favor. The moment is a mix of comedy and tension, as Brian attempts to help only frustrates Stewie even more, making things worse instead of better. The humor here is in Brian's cluelessness, thinking that disrupting Stewie's morning with a sarcastic comment will solve the problem, while Stewie gets dragged into a mess because of Brian's lack of understanding of the situation. It's a classic Brian move, trying to be helpful but just making everything more absurd.
Thanks, Carl.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was fun.
In this scene, Brian and Stewie are at a convenience store, where Brian buys a bunch of lottery scratchers. Stewie, eager to join in on the fun, begs Brian for just one ticket. Brian, acting like he's being generous, gives him a single ticket, but with zero understanding of the chaos that's about to unfold. Stewie, overly excited, scratches off the ticket with childlike optimism, only to realize that the situation quickly spirals out of control. Of course, Brian's impulse to indulge Stewie leads to a mess because he didn't think through the consequences of even the simplest actions, like giving Stewie a lottery ticket. The comic element is in how something as innocent as a scratch-off ticket becomes a disaster in Brian's hands, all while Stewie's trust in him gets shattered further. It's Brian's signature move, thinking he's doing something nice, but only making things worse with his lack of foresight.
I'm sorry for scaring you, all right? But come on, it's not a real robot.
Brian apologizes to Stewie after scaring him with a fake robot monster. He says he didn't mean to freak him out, but his apology seems more like a casual shrug. It's like Brian thinks saying sorry won't fix everything, even though he just caused chaos. Stewie is even more confused and scared. Brian is acting like nothing happened and expecting Stewie to forgive him instantly. This is typical Brian. He causes a mess, is surprised when things go wrong, and gives the least sincere apology ever. The funny part is how Brian's laid-back attitude just makes Stewie's reaction even bigger. Brian gives Stewie some cough syrup to help him sleep, but instead, Stewie gets hilariously drunk. Believing he's perfectly fine, Stewie starts acting out. The situation spirals into chaos, leaving Brian to clean up the mess while Stewie remains clueless about how ridiculous he's being.
I'll give you a tiny bit of this. It should help you sleep.
Here, Brian manages to drag Stewie into a hilarious disaster thanks to his classic irresponsibility. It all starts when Stewie can't sleep, and Brian, being the genius he is, decides the perfect solution is a little cough syrup. He acts like it's no big deal, and even makes it sound like a magic potion for rest. Of course, Stewie trusts him because who wouldn't trust a talking dog who writes novels, right? But instead of peacefully dozing off, Stewie ends up totally loopy, stumbling around like he's had a wild night at a frat party. Things spiral out of control fast. Stewie's syrup-induced antics cause chaos, and Brian, as usual, has to scramble to fix the mess he basically created. It's a classic Family Guy moment, full of ridiculousness, and Brian once again proves he's the king of terrible ideas that somehow turn into comedy gold.
What is it? It's cough syrup. It's not really for kids, but a capful is pretty harmless.
Brian's offhand comment not only lands Stewie in trouble, but also highlights his irresponsibility, ultimately leading to a lesson. Of course, it's all wrapped up with the usual humor and craziness you'd expect from Family Guy. In this episode, Brian unknowingly kicks off a full-blown crisis for Stewie by killing his beloved stuffed bear, Rupert, in an accident. Stewie naturally flips out and immediately turns into an emotional wreck, treating the incident as if he's lost a family member. In a bizarre, over-the-top attempt to make amends, Brian tries to make things right, but it just keeps spiraling into madness. Stewie, still furious, demands that Brian perform increasingly ridiculous tasks, like driving him to Vermont so he can fulfill an absurd pact he made with the dead bear. The whole situation is layered with Stewie's deep, overdramatic attachment to Rupert, contrasted with Brian's clueless and nonchalant responses, turning what could have been a small mistake into a huge mess. The mix of Stewie's outrageous grief, Brian's failed attempts to help, and the hilarious back and forth makes for classic comedic chaos, steeped in dark humor, yet somehow heartwarming in its own twisted way.
Murderer! You killed Rupert!
Brian unwittingly causes total chaos for Stewie when he accidentally kills Stewie's beloved robot toy, which Stewie considers his best friend. Stewie, in full meltdown mode, screams "murderer" and goes full drama queen, treating the event like a tragic death. Brian, ever the oblivious character, tries to apologize and fix things. He offers a half-hearted apology, but Stewie won't hear it. He's too busy plotting a revenge-filled, over-the-top plan to honor his fallen robot friend. The ridiculousness of Stewie's overblown emotions, paired with Brian's complete lack of understanding, transforms a simple accident into a hilarious mess of dark humor and absurdity, making it clear that nothing short of a dramatic, life-altering ceremony will fix things.
Stewie, stop! Stop! Look, why are you being such a jerk over a stupid bear?
In this hilarious mess, Brian makes things much worse when he casually dismisses Stewie's emotional attachment to his bear, Rupert. Stewie, in a fit of anger, accuses Brian of disrespecting the dead, the bear of course, completely flipping out over something that seems absurd to everyone else, but is of utmost importance to him. Brian, even the oblivious one, can't understand why Stewie is making such a big deal, calling it just a bear. This only fuels Stewie's rage, and instead of calming things down, Brian's sarcastic remarks and lack of empathy send Stewie into a dramatic spiral. The humor comes from Brian's cluelessness mixed with Stewie's over-the-top tantrum, as the situation snowballs into an absurd series of events where a simple mistake becomes a full-blown crisis in Stewie's world.
Don't you disrespect the dead!
In a moment of sheer absurdity, Brian unintentionally makes things 100 times worse by trivializing Stewie's beloved toy bear Rupert. When Brian dismisses the bear as just a stupid bear, Stewie flips out, demanding that Brian show respect for the dead. This shoots up into a hilarious chain of events where Brian's cluelessness is met with Stewie's melodramatic overreaction. Instead of offering an apology or attempting to calm Stewie down, Brian's sarcastic comments only fan the flames of Stewie's fury, pushing him into an all-out emotional meltdown. The comedy lies in Brian's inability to understand why Stewie is so upset over a toy, and Stewie's outrage at Brian's lack of respect, turning a simple misunderstanding into a full-blown crisis. It's a perfect example of how Brian's typical lack of awareness manages to create a complete disaster in Stewie's already complicated world. Brian's careless decisions lead to a series of chaotic situations that drag Stewie along for the ride. The trouble starts when Brian gets drunk at the airport and loses their plane tickets, setting the stage for a wild journey.
I'm not drunk. All right, I just have a speech impediment.
Brian tries to convince Stewie that he's not actually drunk by claiming that it's only his second glass and that he just has a speech impediment. Naturally, Stewie isn't buying it and calls out Brian for his obvious drunken behavior. This hilarious moment showcases Brian's usual attempt to dodge responsibility, making light of his situation by offering a laughable excuse. The comedy here lies in the ridiculousness of Brian's self-denial, turning what should be a moment of clarity into another comedic mess. The show's satire shines through, poking fun at how people often try to cover up their bad choices with even worse excuses.
We have to get the hell out of here!
Brian's bad decisions create a whirlwind of chaos that drags Stewie into trouble, whether it's getting drunk and losing their tickets, or making rash choices that lead to even bigger problems. Brian's inability to think things through leaves Stewie stuck with the fallout. Despite Brian's frantic efforts to escape, the mess continues to grow, with Stewie sarcastically pointing out the absurdity of it all. This shows how Brian's attempts to fix his mistakes only result in more trouble, with Stewie unwillingly caught in the middle.
Stewie and I traded in our plane tickets for train tickets.
You suck!
See you in 3 days.
Despite Brian's frantic efforts to escape the mess he created, he only dragged Stewie deeper into it, turning their journey into an endless cycle of disaster.
I know this whole trip has been a mess.
As the journey reaches its end, Brian admits that the whole trip has been a mess. He finally realizes how his poor decisions have caused nothing but trouble for Stewie. Brian's lack of responsibility forces Stewie to deal with the fallout every step of the way. And that wraps up our little roller coaster of laughs and chaos today. We hope you enjoyed the wild journey as much as we loved bringing it to you. Stewie and Brian may have their ups and downs, but hey, that's what makes them unforgettable, right? Now, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, favorite moments, or even what you'd like to see next. Drop it in the comments below. Your feedback means the world to us, so don't be shy. Let's keep the conversation going and make this an even bigger adventure. Until next time, stay awesome and keep smiling.